Wow, so we just covered 2/3 of this chapter, Revelation chapter 14, in 5 parts. I think that's a record for us. So let's talk about the last part. You ready? It's a lot of imagery. It's complete imagery. So this is split into 2 parts. It's the harvesting of the earth and a trampling of the winepress. So we see this figure that's like a son of man. It's obvious that it's Jesus. And he's got his sickle, and the angel tells him, "Take your sickle and reap, because the time to reap has come." So he is seated on a cloud and swung his sickle and harvested the earth. And then another angel came out, and then another angel came out. It says, "Take your sharp sickle and gather a cluster of grapes from the earth's vines, because the grapes are ripe." Let's look at them next. So here in part 2 of our study in this last section of Revelation chapter 14, let's look at the second half. We just read that there's an angel. He's got this sharp sickle as opposed to just the regular sickle that Jesus had in the first part of this last section. And since the earth's vine is ripe, he must harvest the grapes. So let's read on in verse 19. "The angel swung his sickle on the earth, gathered the grapes, and threw them into the great winepress of God's wrath. And they trampled in the winepress outside the city, and blood flowed out of the press, and it rose as high as 180 miles. So that's a lot of blood. So we saw this Jesus figure taking up his people, and then this angel is harvesting the non-believers. Part 3 of our study of this last section of Revelation chapter 14. So we just looked at Jesus harvesting his people, taking them up, and they're good. But this angel harvests the non-believers, throws them into this winepress of God's wrath. And, it's not happening right now in this timeline. This chapter is not exactly chronological, but it's saying that over the long run, they're going to be thrown into this winepress of God's wrath. Because God's kind of upset with them. They didn't really believe in him, especially when he sent his one and only beloved Son to die for us and for our sins and our wrongdoing. So they gotta suffer. But we read in verse 20 that the winepress is outside of the city. What city? I don't know. Let's see. Part 4 of our study here in Revelation chapter 14. This last section of Revelation chapter 14. So let's talk about this city. What is it? The city? What city do you mean city? Here in verse 20. It's Jerusalem. You probably could have guessed that. But I don't know if you know this. It's not there anymore. But way back in the ancient times, they used to have this pit called Gehenna right outside of Jerusalem, and that's where they threw all their trash. They didn't throw people in there. They occasionally threw dead bodies in there, but it just burned everything. It was this eternal flame, just never ended. And so it was used for trash, but now God's using this older imagery from what Jerusalem was to say these people are going to suffer an eternal hellfire, an eternal damnation. Wow, so we just studied all of Revelation chapter 14. It's kind of crazy, right? 3 pretty decently important sections, but strange sections, to say the least. And it's definitely worth to say this chapter is not chronological in any way. A lot of it's just imagery and saying what's going to happen at a certain time or just over the long run. So don't look at it as, oh, right before all these plagues, all this stuff is happening, it's got to happen like that, because that's not how it is. So I hope you understood some of this imagery. I hope you watched all the parts, of course, because if you didn't, go do it. And, keep studying. Keep studying the Bible. Keep studying Revelation. Get ahead. Study Revelation before we study it. You'll understand it better. Love you guys. Peace.